From dumpsters to deception. The untold story of a street kid who exposed a billion-dollar conspiracy. Before we begin, drop a comment below to tell us where you're watching from. If you believe the truth always comes out, like and subscribe. Now sit back and enjoy the story. The sun was setting over downtown Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the alleyways that Riley Monroe called home. The air smelled faintly of garlic and burnt sugar, remnants from the kitchens of high-end restaurants where chefs prepared meals for people who wouldn't think twice about tossing out half-eaten lobster tails or barely touched filet mignon. For Riley, these dumpsters weren't just trash bins. They were her lifeline. 17-year-old Riley crouched behind Le Petit Paris, one of LA's most exclusive eateries. Her sharp green eyes scanned the ground as she rummaged through the discarded boxes with practiced efficiency. She wore an oversized hoodie stained with grease and dirt, its hood pulled up to shield her face from both the cold night air and prying eyes. A backpack slung over her shoulder held tonight's haul, a still warm baguette, a container of risotto with only a few bites missing, and a bottle of sparkling water someone had left unopened on their table. Riley wasn't proud of this life, but it was all she knew. 5 years ago, when she was just 12, her mother disappeared without a word, leaving behind nothing but an empty apartment and a stack of unpaid bills. Since then, Riley had learned how to survive in a city that didn't care whether you lived or died. She'd become resourceful, cunning, and fiercely independent. But beneath her tough exterior lay a flicker of hope, a dream of escaping the streets and starting fresh somewhere far away, somewhere safe. As Riley closed the dumpster lid and turned to leave, something caught her eye, a glint of gold amidst the grime near the back door. She hesitated, then bent down to investigate. It was a small leather pouch, its surface scuffed but unmistakably expensive. Inside, instead of money or jewelry like she'd expected, there was a single USB drive. "What the hell?" she muttered under her breath, holding it up to the dim light of the alley. The drive looked ordinary enough, but why would anyone toss something so valuable into the trash? Curiosity gnawed at her. She slipped the USB drive into her pocket, deciding she'd figure out what was on it later. Later that night, huddled under a makeshift shelter of tarps and cardboard in an abandoned parking garage, Riley pulled out the USB drive again. Using a battered laptop she'd scavenged months earlier, she plugged it in and waited anxiously as the screen flickered to life. The contents of the drive shocked her. Rows upon rows of files filled the screen. Spreadsheets, documents, photos, and videos, all meticulously labeled. As Riley clicked through them, her heart began to race. These weren't random files. They were evidence of corruption. Financial records showing illegal offshore accounts, emails detailing shady deals, and incriminating photos of powerful men and women involved in activities they clearly didn't want anyone to see. And then, buried deep within the folders, she found something even more startling. A name. Victor Langston. Victor Langston was one of the richest men in America, a billionaire real estate mogul whose name was synonymous with luxury and success. He owned skyscrapers, hotels, and entire neighborhoods across the country. Riley had seen his face countless times on billboards and magazine covers. What could someone like him possibly have to do with whatever secrets were hidden on this drive? Her mind raced. Whoever had thrown this away must have been desperate or terrified, and now somehow it had ended up in her hands. Riley knew better than to trust anyone, especially not someone as untouchable as Victor Langston. But part of her couldn't help wondering if this discovery might be her ticket out of poverty. If she played her cards right, maybe, just maybe, she could turn this dumpster find into diamonds. But first, she needed answers, and getting them meant stepping into a world far more dangerous than the streets of LA. The alley was quieter than usual that night, the kind of silence that made Riley's instincts bristle. She moved cautiously, her boots crunching softly against the cracked pavement as she approached the dumpster behind Osteria Mozza. It wasn't one of her usual spots, too close to the main street, but hunger had driven her farther afield tonight. As she leaned over the edge of the dumpster, ready to dig through its contents, a faint groan stopped her cold. Her pulse quickened. Dumpsters weren't supposed to moan. Heart pounding, Riley hesitated for a moment before peering inside. At first glance, it looked like just another pile of trash bags and discarded packaging. But then she saw him, a man crumpled and partially hidden beneath layers of garbage. His expensive suit jacket was torn, his face streaked with blood, and his breathing shallow. In his right hand, he clutched a sleek black briefcase chained to his wrist, the metal links glinting faintly in the dim light from a distant street lamp. Riley froze, torn between instinctive fear and an odd sense of pity. This wasn't some drunk passed out after a bad night. This was something else entirely. The cuts on his hands and the bruises blooming across his face told her he'd been in a fight and lost. She glanced around nervously, half expecting whoever had done this to come back. The streets of LA were no stranger to violence, but this felt different, personal, dangerous. "What do I care?" she whispered to herself, already knowing the answer. She cared because she couldn't unsee him lying there, broken and bleeding. Because if their roles were reversed, if she were the one abandoned in a dumpster, she'd want someone to help her. Even if that someone was a street kid like herself. Cursing under her breath, Riley climbed into the dumpster, careful not to make too much noise. Up close, the man looked older, mid-50s maybe, with silver-streaked hair matted with sweat and dirt. His eyes fluttered weakly, and when he groaned again, Riley realized he was still alive. "Hey," she said sharply, shaking his shoulder gently. "Wake up!" He stirred but didn't open his eyes. Frustrated, Riley grabbed a bottle of water from her backpack and splashed a little on his face. He gasped, jerking awake, and immediately tried to sit up. Pain shot across his features as he collapsed back against the side of the dumpster. "Whoa, easy there," Riley said, holding up her hands. "You're hurt." The man blinked at her, confusion clouding his expression. "Wait, where am I?" "In a dumpster," Riley replied bluntly. "Nice place you picked, by the way." Despite the grim situation, a flicker of amusement crossed his battered face. "I didn't exactly choose it." His voice was raspy but carried an air of authority, the kind that came from years of giving orders rather than taking them. Riley studied him more closely now, noticing details she'd missed before. The tailored cut of his ruined suit, the Rolex watch peeking out from beneath grime, the way he held himself even in pain. This wasn't just any guy. Whoever he was, he had money, power, and enemies, judging by the state he was in. "My name's Evan," he said finally, his voice steadier though still strained. "Evan Sterling." Riley stiffened. The name rang a bell, not as loud as Victor Langston's, but enough to set off warning bells in her head. Sterling Development Group, hotels, office buildings, luxury condos. She'd seen the signs plastered all over downtown LA. If Evan Sterling was involved in whatever mess had landed him here, things were about to get complicated. "Well, Mr. Sterling," Riley said dryly, "you've got quite the story to tell, but first we need to get you out of here." Evan winced as he shifted, trying to move the briefcase chained to his wrist. "This stays with me." "Suit yourself," Riley rolled her eyes. "But unless you can walk, you're not going anywhere." For a moment they locked eyes, her wary green gaze meeting his weary blue one. There was desperation in his expression, but also something else. Gratitude. Gratitude she didn't trust and wasn't sure she wanted. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. Riley shrugged, avoiding the question. "Don't read too much into it. I'm not exactly in the habit of leaving people to die." Even as she said it, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. Helping strangers never ended well, not for girls like her. But something about Evan Sterling tugged at her conscience. Maybe it was the way he clung to that briefcase despite everything, or maybe it was the fact that, deep down, she knew what it felt like to be abandoned. "Come on," she muttered, sliding out of the dumpster. "Let's see if you can stand." As Evan struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Riley for support, neither of them noticed the dark sedan parked at the end of the alley, or the figure watching them from the shadows. Riley lowered Evan back against the dumpster, propping him up carefully as he winced in pain. His breathing was labored, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill of the night. She glanced around nervously, her instincts screaming at her to get out while she still could. But something about the desperation in Evan's eyes kept her rooted to the spot. "Stay here," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "I'll figure this out." Her fingers brushed against the inside pocket of his ruined suit jacket, searching for anything useful. A phone, keys, maybe some cash. Instead, she found a leather wallet, its edges scuffed but otherwise intact. Flipping it open, Riley froze. Inside was an ID card embossed with the Sterling Industries logo. Evan Sterling, CEO. Beneath it, a platinum credit card and several $100 bills. Her stomach churned as the realization hit her. This wasn't just any billionaire. This was Evan Sterling, one of the most powerful men in Los Angeles. The kind of guy who made headlines when he sneezed. "Well, crap," Riley murmured under her breath, staring at the ID. "You really don't belong in a dumpster, do you?" Before she could process what this meant, or whether helping him was now a terrible idea, a sharp voice echoed down the alley. "Hey, has anyone seen the boss?" Riley's head snapped up. Two men had appeared at the mouth of the alley, their silhouettes outlined by the dim glow of the streetlights. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his hands shoved into the pockets of a leather jacket. The other was shorter, wiry, with a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. Both wore expressions that sent shivers down Riley's spine. She ducked low behind the dumpster, pulling Evan closer to shield him from view. He tried to speak, but she clamped a hand over his mouth, shaking her head fiercely. His wide-eyed nod told her he understood. The taller man stepped forward, scanning the area. "He's got to be around here somewhere. Boss doesn't just disappear." "Maybe he ditched the briefcase," the wiry one suggested, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Could have dumped it before running off." "Nah," the first man growled. "He wouldn't leave it behind. Not after everything we've done to keep it safe." Their words sent a jolt through Riley. Safe? What exactly was in that briefcase? And why would someone go to such lengths to protect or steal it? The two men lingered for a moment longer, their eyes sweeping over the shadows. Finally, the taller one grunted in frustration. "Come on, let's check the next block. If anyone sees him, they'll pay for keeping quiet." With that, they turned and disappeared into the night, leaving silence in their wake. Riley waited another full minute before exhaling sharply, her heart hammering in her chest. "That was close," she whispered, releasing Evan's mouth. "Who are those guys?" Evan swallowed hard, wincing as he shifted slightly. "They work for someone I trusted, someone who betrayed me." His voice was barely audible, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable. Betrayal. The kind that left bruises deeper than any fist ever could. Riley frowned, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. A billionaire beaten and left for dead. A briefcase chained to his wrist. Men hunting him like prey. Whatever secrets were locked inside that case, they were worth killing and dying for. "You're not making things easy for me, are you?" Riley said dryly, though there was no real bite to her tone. Evan managed a weak smile. "I didn't ask you to help." "No, you didn't." Riley sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. "But here we are." She glanced down at the wallet still clutched in her hand, then back at Evan. Despite everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that fate, or dumb luck, had thrown them together for a reason. Maybe saving him was reckless. Maybe it was stupid. But Riley Monroe had spent 5 years surviving on scraps and instinct, and something told her this was bigger than both of them. "All right, Mr. Sterling," she said finally, slipping the wallet into her backpack. "Let's get you somewhere safe. Then you can tell me exactly why people are willing to kill to find you." As Riley helped Evan to his feet once more, she couldn't shake the nagging sense that they were being watched. Somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes tracked their every move. Whoever wanted Evan Sterling, and whatever was in that briefcase, wasn't giving up anytime soon. Riley knew she was making a mistake the moment she hauled Evan Sterling into the abandoned building. It wasn't just the weight of his body dragging against her shoulders. It was the sinking feeling in her gut that screamed this was going to end badly. But something about the way he clung to life, even in his battered state, made her keep moving. The old warehouse where Riley occasionally slept was tucked away behind a row of crumbling brick storefronts. Its broken windows were boarded up with rotting plywood, and the air inside smelled faintly of mildew and rust. She lowered Evan onto a pile of blankets she'd scavenged months ago, arranging them as best she could to make him comfortable. Don't get used to it, she muttered under her breath, though Evan was too out of it to hear. This isn't exactly the Ritz. She rummaged through her backpack, pulling out a half-empty bottle of rubbing alcohol, some gauze she'd swiped from a pharmacy dumpster, and an old t-shirt she tore into strips for bandages. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Kneeling beside him, Riley cleaned the cuts on his hands and face with practiced efficiency, ignoring the way he flinched at the sting of the alcohol. His suit jacket was beyond saving, so she cut it away carefully, revealing more bruises mottling his torso. Whoever had done this hadn't held back. As she worked, Riley couldn't help glancing at the briefcase still chained to his wrist. Whatever secrets it held seemed to pulse with ominous energy, like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. She resisted the urge to pry, barely, and focused on keeping Evan alive. Hours passed before Evan finally stirred again. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment, confusion clouded his expression. He blinked up at Riley, who sat cross-legged nearby, sharpening a pocket knife she'd found earlier that week. "You're awake," she said flatly, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Took you long enough." Evan frowned, trying to sit up. Pain shot through him, and he collapsed back onto the makeshift bed with a groan. "Where am I?" "Somewhere safe, for now." Riley gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "You weren't exactly in any condition to check into a hotel." He looked around, taking in the peeling paint, exposed rebar, and piles of debris. "This is safe?" "It's better than a dumpster," she shot back. "Which is where I found you, by the way." Recognition flickered across Evan's face, or maybe it was panic. "A dumpster?" He shook his head, wincing. I don't remember." "That makes two of us," Riley said dryly. "You've got one hell of a bump on your head. Might explain why you can't piece together how you ended up there." Evan reached up tentatively, touching the swollen lump on his temple. Memories flickered like static on a broken TV screen. Flashes of shouting voices, screeching tires, cold metal pressing against his skin, but nothing solid enough to grasp. I think I'm Evan Sterling," he said hesitantly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "At least that's what my ID says." "Well, congrats. You're worth billions." Riley tossed the wallet onto the blanket beside him. "Not that it's doing you much good right now." Evan picked up the wallet, staring at the ID card inside. Something about it felt familiar, yet distant, like looking at a photograph of someone else's life. "Sterling Industries," he murmured. "I own it, or I did, I think." "Great. So you're rich, powerful, and completely useless." Riley rolled her eyes. "Perfect combination." Despite her sarcasm, there was a flicker of concern in her tone. Amnesia was bad news, especially when people were hunting you down. If Evan didn't recover his memory soon, they were both in serious trouble. "What's the last thing you remember?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. Evan closed his eyes, concentrating. Images swirled chaotically. A boardroom filled with tense faces, a luxury penthouse overlooking the city, a woman with piercing blue eyes smiling coldly, but none of it came into focus. "There was a meeting, an argument, someone betrayed me." His brow furrowed. "And then, darkness." "Sounds like you pissed off the wrong people," Riley said bluntly. "Those goons who showed up in the alley? They're looking for you, and whatever's in that briefcase," she nodded toward his wrist, "is probably why." Evan glanced down at the black case chained to him, his fingers tightening reflexively around the handle. "I don't know what's inside, but if it's important enough to kill for..." His voice trailed off, unease creeping into his expression. "Yeah, well, we'll figure that out later." Riley stood, brushing dust off her jeans. "For now, you need rest, and I need to think of a plan that doesn't involve either of us ending up dead." As she moved toward the door, intending to scout the area for food or supplies, Evan called out weakly, "Why are you helping me?" Riley paused, her hand resting on the rusted doorknob. For a moment she considered lying, to him, or maybe to herself. Instead she shrugged, "Because nobody else will." With that, she stepped outside, leaving Evan alone with his fragmented memories and the heavy weight of the briefcase still clutched tightly in his hand. The night stretched endlessly before them, full of unanswered questions and unseen dangers. But for the first time in years, Riley felt a spark of purpose burning through her doubt. If she played her cards right, this billionaire might just be the key to changing her life forever, assuming they both survive long enough to see tomorrow. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the cracks in the boarded-up windows of the abandoned warehouse. Riley sat cross-legged on the floor, her knife twirling idly between her fingers as she watched Evan struggle to sit up again. He looked marginally better than he had the night before, less pale, less shaky, but the haunted expression in his eyes hadn't faded. "You sure about this?" Riley asked, nodding toward the briefcase still chained to his wrist. "Once we open that thing, there's no turning back." Evan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the metal case like it might bite him. "I don't know what's inside," he admitted quietly, "but if those men were willing to kill for it, I need to see." Riley arched an eyebrow. "Fair enough. But let's not kid ourselves. If these guys are tied to organized crime or whatever shady business you've got your hands in, opening this is going to put a bigger target on our backs than we already have." "Then why are you still here?" Evan shot back, surprising even himself with the sharpness of his tone. Riley smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Good question. Maybe I'm just curious." She rummaged through Evan's ruined suit pockets and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. On it was a hastily scribbled 6-digit combination. 724913. "This your?" she asked, holding it up. Evan squinted at the numbers, recognition flickering across his face. "Yes. Yes, it must be mine. It feels familiar." "Well, here goes nothing." Riley handed him the note. "Your call, Mr. Sterling." Taking a deep breath, Evan entered the code into the lock. There was a soft click, and the lid of the briefcase popped open. Inside, neatly arranged folders and documents filled the space, along with a small leather pouch and another handwritten note. Riley leaned closer, scanning the contents while Evan sifted through them with trembling hands. "What the hell?" Riley muttered, pulling out one of the folders. Pages upon pages detailed illegal activities within Sterling Industries, money laundering schemes, insider trading operations, bribes paid to politicians, and even connections to powerful figures in organized crime. Each document bore Evan's signature alongside other executives' names, implicating them all. "This can't be real," Evan whispered, his voice hollow. I couldn't be involved in something like this." "Newsflash," Riley said dryly, tossing another folder onto the pile. "Looks like you're either guilty or being set up. Either way, people want you dead." Evan ignored her, grabbing the handwritten note from the pouch. In neat block letters it read, "If you're reading this, they've turned on you. The flash drive holds everything. The truth about the syndicate, their offshore accounts, and the identities of everyone involved. Find it before they do." "No location?" Riley asked, peering over his shoulder. Evan shook his head, frustration etched across his face. "Nothing. Just find it. How am I supposed to—" "Hold up!" Riley snatched the note back, flipping it over. On the reverse side, someone had scrawled 3 words in faint pencil. "Trust Riley Monroe." Her blood ran cold. "What the actual hell?" Evan stared at her, confusion giving way to suspicion. "Who wrote that? Do you know something I don't?" "I wish I did," Riley snapped, shoving the note back at him. "Because last time I checked, nobody even knows my name except the cops who run me off corners when I'm sleeping rough." The implications hung heavy in the air. Someone connected to all of this knew about Riley, knew she'd find Evan, and somehow they trusted her enough to leave a cryptic clue pointing her toward the truth. "So now what?" Riley demanded, pacing the room. "We've got mobsters, corrupt execs, and some random flash drive floating around out there. Oh, and you've conveniently lost your memory, so congrats. We're basically starting from scratch." Evan rubbed his temples, clearly overwhelmed. "Start with the company, my office. If anyone knows where the flash drive is, or how to stop them, it'll be there. And how exactly are we supposed to get into your fancy skyscraper without getting caught?" Riley crossed her arms. "You look like you've been dragged through a war zone, and she gestured vaguely at herself. "Well, I look like me." Evan sighed, leaning back against the wall. For the first time since waking up, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. I don't know, Riley, but if you're right, if this really is life or death, we don't have a choice. Riley studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. Helping Evan could mean risking everything she'd fought so hard to survive for. But walking away wasn't an option anymore. Not after seeing what was at stake. All right, she said finally, her voice firm despite the unease twisting in her gut. Here's the plan. We hit your office tonight, sneak in, grab whatever intel we can, and hope to God we don't end up in another dumpster. As she spoke, neither of them noticed the faint red glow of a security camera mounted high in the corner of the room. Somewhere far away, unseen eyes narrowed, watching every move they made. By late afternoon, Riley had convinced Evan that they needed reinforcements, someone on the inside who could navigate the treacherous waters of Sterling Industries, someone smart enough to piece together the fragments of his fractured memory and brave enough to take on whoever was behind the conspiracy. Your sister, Riley said firmly as she rifled through Evan's wallet for any leads. Claire Sterling. She's our best shot. Evan frowned, pain flickering across his face, not just physical but emotional. Claire, I haven't spoken to her in years. Our father disinherited her after she accused him of unethical practices. If she knows anything about what's going on now, it's because she saw it coming long before I did. Well, lucky us, Riley muttered, jotting down Claire's name on a scrap of paper. Guess we're paying her a visit. Tracking down Claire Sterling wasn't easy. After being cut off from the family fortune, she disappeared from high society circles entirely. But Riley wasn't one to give up easily. A few well-placed questions at a coffee shop near Claire's old neighborhood led them to a modest apartment above a vintage bookstore downtown. When Riley knocked on the door, it swung open cautiously. On the other side stood a woman in her early 40s with sharp features, piercing gray eyes and hair streaked with silver. Her clothes were simple but elegant, a far cry from the designer wardrobe Riley imagined for someone born into wealth. Can I help you? Claire asked warily, her gaze darting between Riley and the bruised, disheveled man standing behind her. It's me, Claire, Evan said softly, stepping forward. Evan. For a moment, Claire froze, shock evident on her face. Then her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms over her chest. What do you want, Evan? It's been 10 years since you last bothered to call. I didn't come here by choice, Evan replied, his voice strained. I need your help. Claire's eyes narrowed. Help with what? Riley stepped in before things escalated further. Look, Mrs. Sterling, we don't have time for family drama. Your brother got himself into some serious trouble, life and death kind of trouble, and we think you might be able to help us figure out why. Claire studied Riley carefully, noting the girl's scrappy appearance and fierce demeanor. Who are you? The person keeping your brother alive, Riley shot back without missing a beat. Now, can we come in or not? After a tense pause, Claire stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, plants, and handmade pottery. It felt worlds away from the opulence of the Sterling Empire. Once inside, Riley laid out everything they knew. The briefcase, the documents implicating Evan in illegal activities, the mysterious flash drive mentioned in the note, and the men hunting them down. Claire listened silently, her expression unreadable until Riley finished. This doesn't surprise me, Claire said finally, her voice tinged with bitterness. I warned Father about this years ago. The company has always operated in the shadows, cutting corners and making deals no decent person would touch. When I spoke out, they shut me out completely, disowned me. And you never looked back? Riley asked skeptically. No, Claire admitted, but I kept tabs on them, enough to know that something big is brewing within Sterling Industries. Rumors of offshore accounts, secret meetings with unsavory characters. She shook her head. If there's a flash drive with evidence against them, it means someone inside wants to bring them down. That's where you come in, Evan said quietly. You understand the company better than anyone. Help us find it. Claire hesitated, glancing between her estranged brother and the street-smart teenager who seemed determined to save him. Finally, she sighed. All right, but if I agree to help, we do this my way. No more running around half-cocked. We need a plan and allies. Allies? Riley raised an eyebrow. Who exactly are we talking about? There's someone I trust, Claire said cryptically. Someone who used to work for Sterling Industries, but left under suspicious circumstances. He might know where to start looking. Evan nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Do you really think he'll help us? He owes me, Claire replied simply, and right now, that's all we've got. As the three of them began hashing out their next move, none of them noticed the sleek black sedan parked across the street or the pair of binoculars trained on Claire's window. Whoever was watching them knew exactly where to find Claire Sterling, and they weren't about to let her interfere. The sun had barely risen when Riley slipped out of Claire's apartment, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a steaming cup of coffee in hand. She needed air, space to think. Last night's conversation with Claire had left her head spinning, not just because of the mounting danger, but also because of something else that gnawed at the edges of her mind. As she wandered through the quiet streets, sipping her coffee and scanning for anything useful in the dumpsters along the way, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder several times, catching only fleeting glimpses of shadows disappearing around corners or cars idling too long at stoplights. Paranoia? Maybe, but Riley knew better than to ignore her instincts. She ducked into an alley to check her surroundings more carefully, pressing herself against the cold brick wall as she peered out cautiously. That's when they struck. Two men emerged from opposite ends of the alley, cutting off her escape routes. They weren't wearing suits this time. They looked like hired muscle, their faces hard and unreadable. One of them cracked his knuckles menacingly. "Where is he?" the taller one demanded, stepping closer. Riley's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Who?" "The boss," the shorter one growled. "Don't play dumb. We know you've been helping him." Riley backed up slowly, her fingers brushing against the pocket knife tucked into her hoodie. "Sorry, guys, haven't seen your boss. Maybe try posting flyers?" The taller man lunged forward, grabbing her arm before she could react. Pain shot through her wrist as he twisted it behind her back, forcing her to drop the coffee cup. It shattered on the ground, spilling its contents across the pavement. "Let go of me," Riley snarled, kicking backward with all her strength. Her heel connected with his shin, and he cursed, loosening his grip just enough for her to twist free. She bolted down the alley, dodging trash cans and leaping over debris, but the second man tackled her before she could reach the street. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and she hit the ground hard, scraping her palms and knees. Panic surged as rough hands pinned her down, searching her pockets for what? Evidence? A lead on Evan? "You're making this harder than it needs to be," the taller man sneered, leaning close enough for her to smell the stale cigarette smoke on his breath. "Tell us where Sterling is, and we'll let you walk away." Riley spat in his face. "Good luck finding him without me." Fury flashed in his eyes, and he raised a fist, ready to strike. But then a sharp whistle pierced the air. Both men froze, glancing toward the mouth of the alley. A sleek black car idled there, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. The driver's side door opened, and a figure stepped out. A woman in a tailored suit, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun. "That's enough," the woman said coolly, her voice carrying an authority that made even Riley's captors hesitate. "Bring her to me." "No way," Riley snapped, struggling against their grip. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The woman smirked, walking closer until she stood directly over Riley. She crouched slightly, tilting her head as if studying an insect. "You're resourceful, I'll give you that. But you're playing a dangerous game, little girl. One wrong move, and you won't live to see tomorrow." "I'm trembling," Riley shot back, though her bravado wavered under the weight of those icy blue eyes. The woman straightened, turning to the men. "Take her back to the safe house. Let's see how much she knows and who she's working with." Before they could drag her away, Riley managed to wrench one arm free, pulling the pocket knife from her hoodie and slashing wildly. The blade grazed the taller man's forearm, and he yelped, stumbling backward. Seizing the moment, Riley rolled sideways, scrambling to her feet and sprinting toward the street. "Stop her!" the woman shouted, but Riley was already weaving through traffic, dodging horns and shouts as she disappeared into the crowded sidewalk beyond. Back at Claire's apartment, Riley burst through the door, breathing heavily and clutching her injured knee. Claire and Evan both jumped to their feet, alarm written across their faces. "They found me," Riley gasped, slamming the door shut and locking it. "They're getting closer." Claire exchanged a worried glance with Evan. "We need to move. Now." As Claire began gathering supplies, Riley sank onto the couch, her mind racing. The attack had shaken her, not just because of the violence, but because of what the woman had said. "One wrong move, and you won't live to see tomorrow." It wasn't just a threat. It felt personal. And then there were the documents in the briefcase. As Riley replayed the events of the past few days in her head, something clicked. One name kept surfacing in the files: Monroe Consulting, a subsidiary of Sterling Industries. Her mother's name. Riley's stomach churned as fragments of memory surfaced. Late-night phone calls, whispered arguments, her mother pacing the kitchen floor with tears streaming down her face. She'd always assumed her mother left because she couldn't handle raising a child alone. But what if there was another reason? What if her disappearance was tied to the very conspiracy they were unraveling now? "Riley?" Evan's voice broke through her thoughts. He was staring at her, concern etched on his battered face. "Are you okay?" She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know anymore." Whatever secrets lay buried in Sterling Industries, Riley realized, weren't just about Evan or even Claire. They were about her too. And if she wanted answers, she'd have to keep fighting, even if it meant risking everything. Night fell over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across Claire's apartment as the three of them huddled around a cluttered table littered with papers, laptops, and half-empty coffee cups. The air was thick with tension, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Evan piecing together fragments of his memory, Riley digging into her mother's past, and Claire strategizing their next move. Evan rubbed his temples, frustration etched across his face. "It's like flashes, pieces of conversations, board meetings where things didn't add up." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Victor Langston, he's always there, lurking in the background, smiling when he shouldn't be." Riley looked up sharply. "Langston? As in Victor Langston, the guy whose name keeps popping up in those documents?" Evan nodded grimly. "He's been CFO for years, trusted advisor. But now," his voice trailed off as another memory surfaced. A heated argument in his office. Langston's cold smile widening as he leaned across the desk. "You're too soft, Evan. Too sentimental. This isn't just business anymore. It's survival." "They set me up," Evan said suddenly, his eyes widening with realization. "Whatever they're hiding, they needed someone expendable to take the fall. That's why I was attacked." Claire frowned, flipping through one of the folders from the briefcase. "If Langston's involved, we're dealing with more than corporate corruption. He has ties to organized crime, connections that go all the way back to my father's era. And if he finds us first—" Riley didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what it meant. As Evan recounted his fragmented memories, Riley turned her attention to her own investigation. She'd borrowed Claire's laptop earlier, using it to dig deeper into her mother's history. At first, she found nothing unusual: birth records, employment history at Sterling Industries under Monroe Consulting. But then she stumbled upon something chilling. A grainy newspaper article from nearly 2 decades ago caught her eye. The headline read, "Whistleblower Lawsuit Against Sterling Industries, Dismissed Amid Controversy." Riley's breath hitched as she scanned the text. Her mother, Sarah Monroe, had filed a lawsuit alleging widespread fraud within the company, including illegal offshore accounts and bribery schemes. According to the article, the case had gained significant media attention before abruptly disappearing without explanation. No verdict, no follow-up, just silence. "Guys," Riley said hoarsely, turning the laptop toward them. "Look at this." Claire leaned in, her expression darkening as she read. "This explains so much. If your mother uncovered evidence of corruption, they wouldn't have let her walk away, not unless they silenced her somehow." Evan stared at the screen, guilt flashing across his face. "I never even heard about this. Not until now." Riley clenched her fists, anger boiling beneath her skin. "So they buried the lawsuit, and probably my mom along with it. That's why she left me. Or worse. She couldn't bring herself to say it aloud, but the implication hung heavy in the room. Whatever secrets her mother had uncovered, they were worth killing for. And now Riley was staring down the same barrel, trying to unravel the truth that had cost her family everything. Later that night, as Claire and Evan slept fitfully on the couch, Riley sat alone by the window, staring out at the city lights. Her mind raced with questions. Had her mother survived? Was she still alive somewhere, hiding from the same people who wanted Evan dead? Or had she become another victim of Sterling Industries' greed? The sound of footsteps startled her, and she turned to see Evan standing behind her, his face pale but determined. "I remember something else," he said quietly. "The flash drive. It was supposed to contain evidence of Langston's involvement, not just mine. Whoever wrote that note trusted you because they knew your mother, knew what she risked." Riley swallowed hard, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Why does everyone keep saying that? Trust me? I'm nobody. Just a kid who grew up in dumpsters. "You're not nobody," Evan replied firmly. "You've kept me alive this long. You've uncovered more than anyone else could. If anyone can find that flash drive and expose them, it's you." For the first time in years, Riley felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for justice, for closure. Maybe saving Evan wasn't just about escaping poverty. Maybe it was about reclaiming her past and honoring her mother's sacrifice. But as she gazed out at the sprawling city below, Riley knew one thing for certain. Whoever held the flash drive also held the key to her future, and the stakes had never been higher. The next morning, Riley met Marcus at their usual spot, a crumbling bus stop on the outskirts of downtown. For years, Marcus had been her closest ally on the streets, the one person she could trust when no one else cared whether she lived or died. He was scrappy like her, with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing and a knack for survival that rivaled her own. But today, something felt off. "Hey," Marcus said casually as he leaned against the graffiti-covered bench, tossing a crumpled candy wrapper into the trash. "What's up?" Riley didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him carefully, the way his gaze darted around nervously, how his hands fidgeted in his pockets. She'd seen this behavior before, back when she first started scavenging dumpsters. It was the telltale sign of someone hiding something. "You've been following me," Riley said flatly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Don't bother denying it." Marcus froze, caught off guard by her directness. Then he sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Look, Ry, I didn't want it to come to this." "To what?" Riley interrupted, her voice rising despite herself. "Selling me out? Spying on me for Victor Langston?" His silence confirmed everything she'd suspected. Her stomach churned, betrayal cutting deeper than any knife ever could. Marcus wasn't just another street kid. He was supposed to be family. "How much did they pay you?" Riley asked bitterly, stepping closer until they were face to face. "Was it worth it? Betraying me?" "It's not about the money," Marcus snapped, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "They threatened me, Ry. Said if I didn't help them, they'd make sure I ended up in worse shape than Evan Sterling." Riley clenched her fists, fighting back tears. "So you decided to throw me under the bus instead?" "I didn't have a choice," Marcus shot back, desperation creeping into his tone. "You think I wanted this? You're all I've got, Riley. But these people, they don't mess around." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of his betrayal hung heavy between them, mingling with the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Finally, Riley took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. As much as it hurt, she couldn't afford to let emotions cloud her judgment. Not now. "All right," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "If you're working for them, then you'll do exactly what I say. Feed them false information. Tell them we're planning to move tonight, but we're actually hitting Sterling Industries tomorrow." Marcus stared at her, shock written across his face. "Why would you trust me after all this?" "I don't," Riley replied bluntly. "But you owe me. And if you screw this up, I'll make sure Langston isn't the only one coming after you." Her words hit their mark. Marcus swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. "Fine, I'll do it. But you better know what you're doing, Ry." "Oh, I do," Riley said, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Because if we don't take them down, none of us are getting out alive." Later that day, Riley returned to Claire's apartment, where Evan and Claire were finalizing their plan to infiltrate Sterling Industries' headquarters. When she told them about Marcus, Claire's expression darkened, while Evan looked visibly shaken. "We can use this to our advantage," Riley insisted, pacing the room. "If Marcus feeds them fake intel, it'll buy us time to get into the building and find the flash drive." "And if he betrays us again?" Claire asked sharply. "He won't," Riley replied without hesitation. "Not if he knows what's good for him." Evan hesitated, clearly uneasy about relying on deception. "Are you sure about this, Riley? This is dangerous, even for you." "I'm always sure," Riley shot back, though there was a flicker of vulnerability in her voice. "Besides, we don't exactly have a plan B." Claire nodded slowly, conceding to the logic. "All right, let's assume Marcus holds up his end. What's the plan once we're inside?" Riley spread out a blueprint of the Sterling Industries skyscraper she'd scrounged from an old maintenance worker's locker. "Security's tight, but not impossible to crack. We go in through the service entrance after hours. Disable the cameras using this." She held up a small device Claire had provided, "and head straight for the executive floor. That's where the flash drive will be." "What makes you so certain?" Evan asked, leaning over the map. "Because that's where your father kept all his dirty secrets," Claire interjected grimly, "and Langston wouldn't risk moving it anywhere else." As they finalized the details, Riley couldn't shake the image of Marcus's guilty face. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream and yell and demand answers, but she forced herself to stay focused. There'd be time for anger later. Right now they had work to do, and if Marcus dared cross her again, she'd make damn sure he regretted it. By midnight, the stage was set. Marcus had delivered the false information, buying them precious hours to execute their plan. As Riley, Evan, and Claire prepared to leave, Riley glanced at her reflection in the cracked mirror by the door. Her tough exterior hid the turmoil brewing inside. Betrayal, fear, and a fierce determination to see this through. Tonight, they weren't just breaking into a corporate fortress. They were taking on corruption, greed, and the shadows of their own pasts. Whatever happened next, Riley vowed silently, she wouldn't let anyone stand in her way, not even those who claimed to care about her. Because in the end, she'd learned the hard way. The only person you could truly count on was yourself. The next morning, Riley met Marcus at their usual spot, a crumbling bus stop on the outskirts of downtown. For years, Marcus had been her closest ally on the streets, the one person she could trust when no one else cared whether she lived or died. He was scrappy like her, with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing and a knack for survival that rivaled her own. But today, something felt off. "Hey," Marcus said casually as he leaned against the graffiti-covered bench, tossing a crumpled candy wrapper into the trash. "What's up?" Riley didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him carefully. The way his gaze darted around nervously, how his hands fidgeted in his pockets. She'd seen this behavior before, back when she first started scavenging dumpsters. It was the telltale sign of someone hiding something. "You've been following me," Riley said flatly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Don't bother denying it." Marcus froze, caught off guard by her directness. Then he sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Look, Rye, I didn't want it to come to this." "To what?" Riley interrupted, her voice rising despite herself. "Selling me out? Spying on me for Victor Langston?" His silence confirmed everything she'd suspected. Her stomach churned, betrayal cutting deeper than any knife ever could. Marcus wasn't just another street kid. He was supposed to be family. "How much did they pay you?" Riley asked bitterly, stepping closer until they were face to face. "Was it worth it? Betraying me?" "It's not about the money," Marcus snapped, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "They threatened me, Rye. Said if I didn't help them, they'd make sure I ended up in worse shape than Evan Sterling." Riley clenched her fists, fighting back tears. "So you decided to throw me under the bus instead?" "I didn't have a choice," Marcus shot back, desperation creeping into his tone. "You think I wanted this? You're all I've got, Riley. But these people, they don't mess around. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of his betrayal hung heavy between them, mingling with the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Finally, Riley took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. As much as it hurt, she couldn't afford to let emotions cloud her judgment. Not now. "All right," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "If you're working for them, then you'll do exactly what I say. Feed them false information. Tell them we're planning to move tonight, but we're actually hitting Sterling Industries tomorrow." Marcus stared at her, shock written across his face. "Why would you trust me after all this?" "I don't," Riley replied bluntly. "But you owe me. And if you screw this up, I'll make sure Langston isn't the only one coming after you." Her words hit their mark. Marcus swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. "Fine, I'll do it. But you better know what you're doing, Rye." "Oh, I do," Riley said, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Because if we don't take them down, none of us are getting out alive." Later that day, Riley returned to Claire's apartment, where Evan and Claire were finalizing their plan to infiltrate Sterling Industries' headquarters. When she told them about Marcus, Claire's expression darkened, while Evan looked visibly shaken. "We can use this to our advantage," Riley insisted, pacing the room. "If Marcus feeds them fake intel, it'll buy us time to get into the building and find the flash drive." "And if he betrays us again?" Claire asked sharply. "He won't," Riley replied without hesitation. "Not if he knows what's good for him." Evan hesitated, clearly uneasy about relying on deception. "Are you sure about this, Riley? This is dangerous, even for you." "I'm always sure," Riley shot back, though there was a flicker of vulnerability in her voice. "Besides, we don't exactly have a plan B." Claire nodded slowly, conceding to the logic. "All right, let's assume Marcus holds up his end. What's the plan once we're inside?" Riley spread out a blueprint of the Sterling Industries skyscraper she'd scrounged from an old maintenance worker's locker. "Security's tight, but not impossible to crack. We go in through the service entrance after hours. Disable the cameras using this." She held up a small device Claire had provided. "And head straight for the executive floor. That's where the flash drive will be." "What makes you so certain?" Evan asked, leaning over the map. "Because that's where your father kept all his dirty secrets," Claire interjected grimly, "and Langston wouldn't risk moving it anywhere else." As they finalized the details, Riley couldn't shake the image of Marcus's guilty face. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream and yell and demand answers, but she forced herself to stay focused. There'd be time for anger later. Right now they had work to do. And if Marcus dared cross her again, she'd make damn sure he regretted it. By midnight, the stage was set. Marcus had delivered the false information, buying them precious hours to execute their plan. As Riley, Evan, and Claire prepared to leave, Riley glanced at her reflection in the cracked mirror by the door. Her tough exterior hid the turmoil brewing inside. Betrayal, fear, and a fierce determination to see this through. Tonight, they weren't just breaking into a corporate fortress. They were taking on corruption, greed, and the shadows of their own pasts. Whatever happened next, Riley vowed silently, she wouldn't let anyone stand in her way. Not even those who claimed to care about her. Because in the end, she learned the hard way. The only person you could truly count on was yourself. The clock ticked ominously as Riley, Evan, and Claire huddled in the dimly lit service corridor of Sterling Industries' towering headquarters. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead mingled with the distant echo of security guards patrolling nearby floors. Every second felt like an eternity. "We're running out of time," Claire whispered urgently, glancing at her watch. "If we don't find that flash drive soon, Langston will figure out Marcus's intel was fake." Riley ignored her, her focus entirely on the contents of Evan's briefcase spread across the floor. She'd gone over every document, every scrap of paper, searching for anything they might have missed. And then it hit her, a detail so obvious she almost laughed at herself. "Evan," Riley said sharply, holding up one of the handwritten notes from the briefcase, "does this mean anything to you? Where trust lies, truth hides." Evan frowned, his brow furrowing as he repeated the phrase under his breath. Then his eyes widened and he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small keychain shaped like the Sterling Industries logo. It was something he'd carried for years, so commonplace he hadn't even thought twice about it. "This?" he asked incredulously, turning the tiny object over in his hands. "It can't be." "Try it," Riley urged, grabbing the keychain and examining it closely. Sure enough, hidden within the sleek design was a miniature USB port. With trembling fingers, she plugged it into Claire's laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying folder after folder of incriminating evidence. Emails detailing illegal transactions, video recordings of secret meetings between Victor Langston and members of organized crime syndicates, and financial records exposing billions funneled through offshore accounts. Claire let out a low whistle, scrolling through the files. "This is it. This is everything." Evan stared at the screen, his face pale but resolute. "All these years, I had no idea." "Well, now you do," Riley said grimly, snapping the laptop shut. "And if we don't get this to the right people, none of it matters." Their plan was risky, but it was their only shot. The next morning, Sterling Industries was hosting its annual shareholders meeting, a high-profile event attended by investors, executives, and media outlets. If they could expose the conspiracy there, in front of everyone, Langston wouldn't be able to sweep it under the rug. But getting inside wasn't going to be easy. "You'll need credentials," Claire said, handing Riley a lanyard with a forged ID badge. "I've arranged passes for all three of us. Once we're in, Riley, you'll handle the tech setup. I'll distract Langston during the presentation. And Evan," she hesitated, looking at him, "you'll have to confront him publicly. Are you ready for that?" Evan nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. "For my sister, for your mother, for everyone they've hurt, I have to be." As dawn broke over Los Angeles, the trio made their way to the gleaming skyscraper where Sterling Industries conducted its business. The lobby buzzed with activity as employees and guests streamed inside, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Riley kept her head down, clutching the laptop tightly as they passed through security. Her heart raced as the guards scanned her badge, but the forgery held up, and they were waved through without incident. Once inside, Riley split off from Evan and Claire, heading toward the audiovisual control room. Using skills honed from years of surviving on the streets, she bypassed the locked door and slipped inside unnoticed. Within minutes, she'd hacked into the system, ensuring the flash drive's contents would broadcast live during Langston's keynote speech. Meanwhile, Claire joined the crowd gathering in the auditorium, positioning herself near the stage where Langston stood confidently, basking in applause. Evan lingered near the back, waiting for his moment. As the meeting began, Langston launched into his polished presentation, boasting about Sterling Industries' success and promising record profits. But just as he reached the crescendo of his speech, Riley activated the feed. Suddenly, the massive screens flanking the stage flickered, and then displayed damning evidence of corruption. Gas rippled through the audience as email chains, financial records, and videos filled the room. Langston froze, his confident smile crumbling into panic. "What is this?" he demanded, spinning toward the technical crew. Before anyone could react, Evan stepped forward, his voice ringing out clearly across the stunned auditorium. "This is the truth, Victor. The truth about what you've done. To me, to my family, to this company." Langston's face twisted with rage as he lunged toward Evan, but security intervened, dragging him away amidst shouts and chaos. Reporters scrambled to capture the scene, cameras flashing as the scandal unfolded in real time. Claire found Riley in the control room, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered hoarsely, "after all these years." Riley nodded, exhaustion and triumph washing over her. For the first time in her life, she felt like more than just a street kid. She'd taken down giants and proved that even someone who started in a dumpster could shine like diamonds. The auditorium erupted into chaos as the truth unfolded on the massive screens. Victor Langston, once untouchable in his tailored suit and smug demeanor, was now exposed for what he truly was, a criminal mastermind who had manipulated Sterling Industries for personal gain. His face turned an ugly shade of red as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed relentlessly. "No!" Langston bellowed, lunging toward the podium in a desperate attempt to regain control. This is a lie, a fabrication. But before he could say more, Evan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. It's over, Victor. We have you on video orchestrating illegal deals, laundering money, and conspiring with organized crime. You've betrayed this company and everyone in it. Security guards moved quickly, surrounding Langston as he struggled against their grip. For a man who had spent decades pulling strings from the shadows, being dragged out in handcuffs must have felt like a cruel twist of fate. As he disappeared through the doors, his shouts of denial faded into silence, leaving behind only stunned murmurs from the crowd. Evan stood tall, addressing the room with newfound clarity. Memories that had eluded him for days suddenly clicked into place. The boardroom arguments, the late-night phone calls, the mounting pressure from Langston to look the other way. He remembered now why he'd fought so hard to resist, even when it cost him friendships and alliances within the company. This isn't just about Victor Langston, Evan continued, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. For years, Sterling Industries has operated under a veil of corruption. My father allowed it. I ignored it, but no longer. Today marks a new beginning, not just for this company, but for all of us. Applause broke out tentatively at first, then grew louder as investors and employees realized the significance of what they'd witnessed. Justice wasn't always swift or easy, but today it had arrived in full force. Amid the commotion, Riley slipped into the back of the room, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. She didn't need recognition or applause. She'd done what she set out to do. Still, she couldn't help feeling a pang of pride as Claire approached her, tears glistening in her eyes. You saved us, Claire said softly, pulling Riley into a tight embrace. You saved my brother. You saved me. Riley shrugged, brushing off the praise with characteristic modesty. I just pointed people in the right direction. You're the one who'll fix this company. Claire shook her head firmly. Not alone. Together. All three of us. As Evan joined them moments later, his expression was one of gratitude mixed with awe. Riley, I don't know how to thank you. Without you, none of this would have been possible. She smirked, though there was warmth in her gaze. How about starting by giving me a job, preferably one where I don't have to wear a suit? Evan chuckled, nodding. Done. Consider yourself officially part of the team. For the first time in years, Riley felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for the future. Evan vowed to dismantle the corrupt systems that had plagued Sterling Industries, implementing reforms and transparency measures that would restore trust. Claire returned to her rightful place within the company, using her insider knowledge to guide its transformation. And Riley? She became something she never imagined, a hero, not because she sought glory, but because she refused to let injustice go unchecked. Later that evening, as the city lights twinkled beyond the skyscraper windows, Riley found herself standing beside Evan in his newly reclaimed office. The briefcase sat closed on his desk, a symbol of everything they'd uncovered and overcome. You know, Evan said thoughtfully, glancing at Riley, you remind me of someone. Yeah? Riley raised an eyebrow. Who? My sister, Evan replied with a smile. Stubborn, fearless, and impossible to ignore. Riley grinned, leaning back against the desk. Guess great minds think alike. As they shared a quiet laugh, the weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift ever so slightly. They had faced danger, betrayal, and pain, but together they had emerged stronger. And while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, Riley knew one thing for certain. Sometimes even diamonds start in the dirt. Weeks passed after the explosive shareholders' meeting, and life began to settle into a new rhythm for Riley Monroe. Sterling Industries was undergoing a sweeping transformation under Evan's leadership, with Claire spearheading ethical reforms and transparency initiatives. The scandal had shaken the corporate world, but it also signaled a chance for redemption, not just for the company, but for everyone involved. For Riley, the changes were deeply personal. Evan had offered her more than just a job. He'd extended an invitation to stay in one of the family's sprawling estates, a place where she could finally escape the streets that had shaped her for so long. But Riley, ever stubborn and fiercely independent, refused to accept charity. I didn't save your ass so you could give me handouts, she said bluntly when Evan broached the subject. If I'm gonna work for you, I'm earning my keep. No shortcuts. Evan couldn't help but laugh at her determination. All right then, how about this? You'll be my personal assistant. Official title, full pay, benefits, the works. You've got a knack for solving problems most people wouldn't touch. I need someone like you by my side. Riley hesitated, considering the offer. It wasn't just about the money or the perks. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above the circumstances that had defined her for so long. Finally, she nodded. Fine, but don't expect me to start wearing heels anytime soon. Deal, Evan replied, extending his hand. When Riley shook it, there was a spark of mutual respect between them, a bond forged through shared struggles and hard-won victories. As Riley settled into her new role, another chapter of her life began to unfold. Through Claire's connections, they tracked down her mother, Sarah Monroe, who had been living under an assumed name in a quiet coastal town. Years of hiding had taken their toll, leaving Sarah wary and guarded. But when Riley walked into the small cafe where they'd arranged to meet, her mother's eyes filled with tears. Riley, Sarah whispered, rising from her seat as if afraid Riley might vanish before her eyes. Is it really you? It's me, Mom, Riley said softly, her voice thick with emotion. She hadn't called Sarah Mom in years, not since the day she disappeared without explanation. But standing there, face to face with the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her, Riley felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. They talked for hours, piecing together the fragments of their fractured relationship. Sarah confessed how she'd uncovered evidence of corruption within Sterling Industries and fled to protect Riley, knowing the danger they'd both be in if anyone discovered her plans to expose the truth. I thought I was doing the right thing, Sarah admitted, her voice trembling, but leaving you, it broke my heart every single day. Riley listened silently, her anger and resentment slowly melting away. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, not after years of abandonment and unanswered questions. But for the first time, she understood why her mother had made the choices she did. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward together. That evening, Riley stood on the balcony of Evan's penthouse office, gazing out at the glittering skyline of Los Angeles. The city stretched endlessly before her, a tapestry of lights and shadows that mirrored her own journey. From dumpsters to diamonds, despair to triumph, Riley had fought tooth and nail to survive, and now she was building a future worth fighting for. Behind her, Evan joined her at the railing, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. To new beginnings, he suggested, raising his glass. Riley smirked, clinking her glass against his. To surviving idiots like you. They both laughed, the sound carrying into the night air. For all the challenges ahead, Riley knew she wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, friends who believed in her, and she had herself, resourceful, resilient, and ready to take on whatever came next. As she turned back to the view, Riley felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But for the first time, she dared to dream of what lay beyond the horizon. Because even diamonds aren't born shining. They're forged under pressure,